as I always say, if you want to speak fluently, so if you want to be able to interact in the real world confidently and fluently like a native speaker, you've got to be speaking a lot. Welcome back to the StoryLearning podcast. Today's question is about speaking and how to go from knowing a lot of stuff in a language to actually speaking the language fluently. The question comes from Mateo, who asks, Ollie, thank you for the podcast. You're welcome. I speak Dutch at a decent level, but I still can't speak very well. I do a lot of immersion, and so the question is, which exercises do you recommend next to listening and reading? Should I do flashcards? And also, how can I practice speaking alone without a tutor? Right, so a bit of a contradiction at the beginning is I speak Dutch at a decent level, but I still can't speak very well. So what are you really saying here, Mateo? I guess what you're really saying is, I think you know a lot, but you can't speak as fluently as you would like. That's my guess, because you say that you do a lot of immersion, which is great. You've obviously been listening to some good podcasts, and immersion means that you are likely to know a lot of things in the language, right? You're going to have a good vocabulary, you're going to be able to understand a lot. But as I always say, if you want to speak fluently, so if you want to be able to interact in the real world confidently and fluently like a native speaker, you've got to be speaking a lot. Now, reading as a skill is, in my opinion, the single best way to learn a language, right? To learn everything you need in order to be able to speak a language, but it's not sufficient in itself. After that, in addition to that, alongside that, you also have to be speaking a lot. In the last episode, I talked about how, I gave a few examples about how in different languages that I'd learned, I talked about how when I learned Spanish, when I learned Japanese, things that I did specifically to cross that point into like real fluency. And my recollection from that really was that I've learned 8 languages, all to a good level. And in each one, I managed to find in some way an opportunity to do a lot of intensive speaking. And I did that in different ways in different languages, but I was very proactive in going out and searching for either situations or people or friends or groups or something that allowed me to spend days, weeks, months on end speaking a huge amount. And I don't know how I could possibly have got fluent in any of those languages without doing that. So you've got to go through a period of speaking a lot. I think that is best done after you've accumulated a real body of knowledge in the language, and the best way to do that is through listening and reading, which is the foundation of the story learning method. It's what we teach over here, right? So, Mateo, it sounds to me like you are just ready for this next phase. Now, you've asked for specific speaking recommendations. So I'm going to give you some. I've actually created, and this was inspired by your question actually, I've actually created something that I'm calling it's like a speaking menu really. It's like a list of activities that you can do at any point to practice speaking. And what I recommend you do is print this off, stick it up on the fridge, and then whenever you want to practice speaking every day in a language, you can just look at this menu, just choose one thing that you're going to do and to do that. So it kind of gives you a bunch of options that are always there. If you like that, it's completely free. You can scan the QR code on the screen, or you can click the link in the description and get that. Again, I recommend you just grab it, print it off, stick it somewhere that you are going to see. So let's get into this. So why is it not enough to just study? Why do we actually have to practice speaking? So I told you my practical experience, but there's a couple of things from the literature here that are helpful and kind of back up this point. And the first is the idea of what's called transfer appropriate processing. Now, transfer appropriate processing is the idea that memory works best when learning resembles later use. So I've heard this called like the directness approach. There's a few different ways of talking about this, but essentially, if you want to remember stuff, you're better off learning in a way that you're actually going to use it later. So if you are learning a language to, I don't know, give presentations at work, that's your ultimate goal, to be able to stand up at work and give PowerPoint presentations. Well, it's going to be easier for you to do that successfully and perform successfully if, as part of the learning process, you actually practice these PowerPoint presentations or learn from PowerPoint presentations. And so there's a disconnect, if you like, for people that want to get good at speaking, but spend all of their time doing other activities. It kind of gets back to my earlier point, really. Like, if you want to get good at speaking, you've got to speak a lot. And It is always multidimensional with language learning. And Robert de Keyser has this thing called skill acquisition theory. And his point is that language use is a complex cognitive skill, like playing the piano or driving, meaning that it's not just enough to know something on one dimension. We need to know it in multiple dimensions. So all of this basically points to, over the long run, using language across all the different skills. So reading, listening, speaking, also writing, right? Because writing helps you process language in some very different, interesting, and important ways as well. But Mateo, you have asked specifically about speaking. So let me give you a few practical things that I think you could do right now if your goal is to just develop more fluency. So first of all, we live in the age of AI. So I would go and get yourself a subscription to Langua. Langua is a fantastic AI speaking tool, and the quality is fantastic. It's not the same as speaking to a real human, obviously, but it doesn't need to be, because for a pretty reasonable monthly subscription compared to the price of paying a teacher for an hour of their time, you get to just speak 24 hours a day if you want, using a whole bunch of different tools that they have, like role plays, debating, or just talking about your day, whatever it is. And I use Langua all the time whenever I want to just actually speak, because so much of this is about just outputting. It's about the experience of just getting words out of your mouth physically. Like developing that muscle is a question of repetition. So I would get yourself a subscription to Langua or any other AI app that you like, and just use that to start practicing speaking, because it's such wonderful technology. And whatever you think of AI, I think AI applied to language learning can be extremely useful. And so with AI, not only are you going to be actually practicing producing sounds yourself, but the AI can respond very well, actually. And so you're practicing both the productive and receptive skills. So you're practicing getting the language out, but you're also practicing listening to what comes back, processing it, and responding. So again, really, really good. But we can go more analog if you like, and talking to yourself. If you were a fly on the wall watching me wandering around my house, you'd think I was absolutely mad, because I'm often just walking around talking to myself. And I think I've realized that I process information through talking. And I do this in English as well. If there's something on my mind, I will often just sort of speak it as if I'm teaching it or something. But doing this in a foreign language is obviously great. Now, what can you do? A few ideas for you. You can narrate something that happened. So if you know something that happened today, like an embarrassing thing at work or whatever, you can just tell the story to yourself of what happened in the language. Oh, you won't believe what John did next. And then, oh my God, he fell down the stairs, but he was fine. Tell the story. The reason this is useful is because if you're narrating daily things, this is the sort of thing that you're going to want to do in the language that you're learning anyway, right? So if we can just tie that to daily events, that's cool. Next is role play. So you know these situations where you've got two people talking about something. It could be something at work, it could be something between your friends, it can be an imaginary conversation between you and someone else. Just practice acting out the conversation. You play both sides of the conversation and just work through the conversation. Obviously, there's nothing natural about this, but it just forces you to go through the motions of thinking, what would I say in this situation? How would this person respond? And then you respond. It sounds silly, but it's super useful. You can do things like summarizing. So if you've been watching something on Netflix, tell the story. What was it about? And yes, you're doing this to yourself. It's useful because when you don't know a word for something, it becomes immediately apparent, right? So what was I watching? I was watching this French Special Forces thing recently. And if I don't know the word if I don't know how to say he was trying to identify the source of the ammunition. If I don't know how to say that in French, I immediately find out if I'm retelling the story, right? So by retelling the story, it exposes some gaps in my vocabulary, and that in itself is useful for you. You can go and plug those gaps. So talking to yourself, like, it sounds silly, but try doing it. If you do it every day, you will develop more facility at speaking. Next is record yourself speaking. Now, you can record yourself doing the activities I just described if you want. It can be difficult to listen back to yourself doing that kind of thing, right? Because you just think, oh my God, do I really sound like that? But again, recording yourself and listening to yourself is useful, because that is what other people hear were you to speak to them, right? If you go up to someone on the street, they are going to hear you from the perspective of the other, right? So recording yourself and listening back can be brutal, but it at least gives you a very clear picture of how you sound, right? But you might prefer to record yourself doing things that are not improvised, right? One of my favorite activities of all time has been to prepare and give little talks or monologues. Rather than improvising it, write a monologue about something, describing the Netflix show you've been watching or whatever. And then once you've written it, read it aloud, record yourself, listen back to it, see if you can improve. You can try describing a picture, that picture on the wall. Let me just talk about it. Record yourself. So there's a guy called Daniel Goodson who started a podcast called My Fluent Podcast. But Daniel was a learner of English. So he's learning English and he created his own podcast. And this is such a fantastic idea because regardless of if anyone listens to it or whatever anyone thinks of your English or whatever, the fact that you sit down and you record yourself speaking, this kind of proactive action is just incredibly powerful for a kind of self-accountability. So why not start your own podcast or YouTube channel? I know this probably sounds ridiculous and outlandish, but amazing things happen when you start to put things out in the world. Back in 2013, I put out my first blog post, and shortly after that, my first YouTube video. You can go back and watch those original videos on my YouTube channel if you want. They're all still there. And look, 13 years later, I now have I'm still doing this thing, working with languages, sold millions of books, published videos that are watched by millions of people. Crazy things can happen. So try recording yourself speaking. Next is shadowing. Shadowing is where you play some audio from a podcast or a YouTube channel or whatever, and you get the transcript and you shadow. You read along at the same time. This is cool because it gives you what I call glimpses of mastery. And glimpses of mastery is by shadowing along with a native speaker, if you do it well, it gives you the experience of what it would be like to speak fluently. So if you shadow me now, for example, right, and you read it back with the exact same tone and speed and intonation. Okay, it's not you speaking really, it's not your ability to speak, but by copying me, you get this embodied cognition, or you get to feel and experience what it is like to speak like that. And that is very informative and very instructive for your overall language. So shadowing is fantastic. The other thing, of course, is to read and listen. And it does sound, Mateo, like you're doing a lot of this anyway, but reading and listening along with the audio at the same time is good because it speeds up your cognition, right? You have to kind of read along to keep up. And so that can be useful, even though it's not specifically like speaking in particular. I'm actually, funnily enough, I'm working on a new series of books at the moment with Teach Yourself. This will be out sometime in 2027 probably. And these are a little bit like my short story books, but they are focused on dialogues, right? And so rather than being stories, they're still stories, but they're spoken dialogues, a little bit like a screenplay. And as part of those, I have these exercises where every four chapters or so, I have a series of activities which are, okay, now tell the story or tell the story back to get you to speak out loud. And in the back of the book, I have like examples of what you might say that you can refer to. So all these different speaking, and then like these speaking activities that you can do in groups, because I've realized a lot of people read my books in like study groups and things like that in a circle. I never really anticipated that that's how they would use them. And so I've created these activities that are meant to be used in your study group. Anyway, that's something that I'm doing for the speaking side of things. But look, more to the point, Mateo, you've asked for activities you can do by yourself. Flashcards, no, because flashcards are not, they're too short and restrictive, right? We need to be encouraging expansive types of exercises. But fundamentally, Mateo, if you want to be good at speaking, you've got to find people to speak to and speak with them. So I would really encourage you, I don't know if you live in the Netherlands, but I would try and find that safe person that you can meet with regularly and practice with regularly, right? And I'm a big fan of language exchanges, obviously. I've talked about that a lot in the past. If you can't find that person, find a local tutor or a teacher. You can go to LanguaTalk, or it's the same business as Langua actually, but they have a place where you can find actual human tutors as well. Obviously that's more expensive, and you've asked again to do this without a tutor, but I would encourage you to find that person somehow. Like if you're happy to pay, that can be a tutor. If you want to do it for free, it can be a language exchange. You have to be speaking with people if you want to get good at speaking, all right? So that might be a mental block of some kind that you might need to overcome. The last thing I'll leave you with is the idea of doing activities that are non-language related, right? So when I lived in Japan, I used to go to salsa classes on a Friday night, and that was actually great for my Japanese because I didn't go there to learn Japanese, but I actually learned a ton of Japanese because everyone who was there was Japanese, but they were there for the salsa, not for the language, which means they didn't care about speaking to me in English. They were happy to speak in Japanese. We had this, the language was just the medium through which we were studying or learning something else. And so that became a great language learning environment. So again, Mateo, if you live in the Netherlands or you have access to this somehow, can you go to some kind of, I don't know, salsa class, yoga class, live touring class, I don't know what, something that's actually going to happen in Dutch so that you can put yourself in that situation where you're likely to find people who are going to be speaking to you about other things in the language. That's just the kind of thing that can be very, very helpful for those of us who tend to make language and language learning the be-all and end-all. It kind of helps us to remember that it's actually just part of a bigger picture, and the bigger picture is actually using the language for our lives, right? So anyway, I hope that's helpful. Again, you might like to download this list of speaking activities that I got for you because it's just going to give you a very quick reference thing that you can do every day. Just wake up, pick one thing, do that. There's a link in the description for that. But thanks for the question. And if you have a question about language learning, feel free to leave a comment either on Spotify or on YouTube, wherever you're looking at this podcast. And again, if you enjoy the podcast, please leave me a rating and a review wherever you get your podcasts. I know it's a big ask, and I don't know how often people do this, but if you could leave me a rating and a review, that would be very, very welcome, because that's how the podcast grows. It's how more people find out about it. So thank you very much, and I'll see you back in the next episode of the podcast.